My guest today on the podcast is Jennifer Nicholaisen. She is the founder and director of an organization called Seek Healing that has a very different and I think effective approach to helping people with addiction and substance abuse recovery. And I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today, Jennifer, to talk about your ideas. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you. So, to start, what if we just talk a little bit, if it's okay, about where this came from with you? That there's it's a labor of love, but there's a bit of a personal story here too.
Yeah, absolutely. That is true. It's both a professional and personal endeavor. It's interesting, actually. Just before we started this conversation, I was in a board meeting where we were setting intentions and goals for the year, and talking about how much this work is both professional and creating something in the world and a really symbiotic healing process through our involvement in it and our commitment to doing the work. So it's certainly been that way since day one. And for me, it started with a close friendship I had, a close connection that I had with someone who was bonded to opiates, heroin and meth, who was dying. She was really suffering in the depths of that disease. And it's a long story, but I ended up partnering with her to help her get access to a treatment that she couldn't afford, a alternative type of opiate detox treatment called ibogaine-assisted therapy. It uses a plant medicine. It's a little bit more alternative. And while the treatment worked miraculously, and she's been abstaining from those drugs ever since, what we found was that in the wake of her detox experience, there was absolutely no support for integration and for dealing with and looking at and understanding and healing through all of the emotions and traumas that came up through the detox experience, which I think for anyone going through a detox experience, that's always life-changing and big things always come up. And it's really quite astonishing how few resources we have as a society for supporting people through that post-detox integration process, which for many people can take as long as a year, 2 years, 3 years, especially depending on the level of trauma that a person is healing from, and what kind of life they're trying to rebuild.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. And so it sounds like along this journey, becoming aware of like just the lack of resources for people who heal. What I've gathered from what I've read about your work, what I know of it, is that you also became aware that relationships were a very important part of the journey of recovery. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. They're a critical part. And I really appreciate the resonance with you specifically and this work that you're engaged in. I'm curious to check out your book after we get done the podcast, because it's absolutely true. And it's the truth that I've discovered in my life and in this work is that, it was one thing identifying that lack of services post-detox for substance use disorders specifically. And the need for an organization like Seek Healing became really clear through that gap. But there's more to the gap really that we're addressing. And that I discovered more through my personal experience of addiction and bonding to substances and my relationship with this person who I helped and who helped me. It was really through the mirror of our relationship that I came to understand my own dysfunctional relationships with different substances. You may have already heard me using the word bonding instead of addiction. I tend to prefer that word because of this question that you're asking, because really when we talk about substance use or addiction, a more accurate way to use our words is to say we're bonded to those substances or to those behaviors. We're achieving the same neurochemical reactions when we meet our needs with those behaviors or substances in the same way that we would in the same neurochemical feedback that we're seeking or that we get when we connect with other humans in person. So it was really through my mirror with my friend that I came to be able to see that even though I wasn't using IV drugs, really my own bonding issues were with substances that were much more socially acceptable, prescription amphetamines,
Mm-hmm.
and non-legal amphetamines and alcohol. But I was managing it in a way that my life hadn't shipwrecked like hers had, but I still was really suffering, and feeling a lot of powerlessness in my life,
Yeah.
in my work. And so it was through my own process of healing that it came to be really clear that connection is what we all need, in order
Yeah.
to keep healing and building a strong community of support.
Well, and you bring up such a great point, which is that there's really like a spectrum around addiction or bonding, to use your term. And at the extreme, it's like, yes, there are very clear like drug addicts and peoples whose lives are totally organized around substances and who are not like functioning because of their illness. And also, there are a lot of people, and I think I've certainly fallen into this category at certain points of my life, around functioning, being like just normal garden variety human being who is sort of propped up by different substances or experiences that are like subclinical. You're not necessarily going to go check yourself in somewhere, but they're also very real. And what you're saying is that and I've talked about this on past podcasts related to the way that people can get addicted to particularly toxic relationships sometimes, like that we are built to bond, and that people can bond to substances rather than other humans. And this is like the whole framework of what is now your treatment program.
Yep. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
exactly right. We've, to your point, I think as a society, as a medical industry, and as a
Mm-hmm.
mental health industry, we've done a pretty good job developing infrastructure for addressing the biological parts of
Yeah.
addiction and substance use behaviors, as well as the psychological parts, um, psychotherapy and different treatments like this. But we've long understood that mental health exists on this
Mm-hmm.
biopsychosocial spectrum. And we
Yeah.
don't have almost any infrastructure for helping people reframe their social skills and develop social resources that
Mm-hmm.
fill this need that you're speaking to for a meaningful relationship.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, I hope we could talk about maybe two different aspects of this, if this is okay. And I just like knowing my listeners, and because we're doing love, happiness, and success here. And so I think the listeners of this podcast and most of the people that we see at Growing Self, we're not doing any kind of like, capital A addiction treatment. It's really more like improving relationships and feeling better and achieving, got the kinds of careers and lives that people want. But there are two things that I'm certain my listeners are very interested in hearing more about from you. And one of the things is I do talk to a lot of people who develop attachments to things that, again, aren't really healthy for them, but they're not like the super serious level. So like it's, maybe coming home and drinking 2.5 glasses of wine after work every day, or like other just unhealthy habits, like binge watching shows or spending too much money that they're unhappy with, but they struggle to change. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that your perspective could be really helpful to talking about that. And also, I know for a fact there are a lot of people listening to this right now who love someone with all their heart and soul who is profoundly addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they don't know how to help them. And they feel very helpless and just scared to death for their friend or their family member. Sounds like maybe a similar experience that you had
Mm-hmm.
with your friend. And so I would love to also get your insights on how to handle that in a way that's genuinely helpful to someone, uh, without enabling or pushing them away, because I think that that's a real pain point for a lot of people. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, there's
So
a lot to unpack there, but I'm
there
happy
is.
to address both of those.
Yeah. So first things first. So maybe we could talk about how your program works and how people listening to this could maybe apply some of these ideas in their own lives related to helping them get unbonded, to use your language, from things that are not ideal, but that might be a placeholder for the connection and relationships that they really and truly need.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, a lot of these bonds or patterns are subclinical, or
Yeah,
something that's not acutely, this is destroying my life, but I'm just noticing I'm existing at this kind of low grade suffering. Uh,
yeah,
Most of my days,
totally.
an experience of not really being fully alive. And the truth is that that they're connected. It's a spectrum, as you say. Now, at one end of the spectrum, we have really dangerous bonds. I think the best way to think about the spectrum is some bonds are more physically dangerous than others. Using IV heroin comes with just a lot more physical risks than bonding to a person in a codependent relationship, or bonding to something less dangerous like caffeine or cannabis. And what we understand is that there's a correlation. We've known since the 90s, when the ACEs study came out,
Mm-hmm.
about adverse childhood experiences, that there's some type of correlation between trauma and the level of danger a person might be willing to subject themselves to, or to the level of risk a person is able to accept when they're navigating these types of behaviors. And what's interesting about that study is that it's not universal, right? Or it leaves out these subclinical experiences that people have. And I think what really needs to be understood there is that we need to expand our definition of trauma. And that trauma takes so many shapes and forms, and it has to do with how we what attachment patterns we form with our caregivers in early childhood, as well as what folks in the medical industry now are talking about, traumas of commission versus traumas of omission. So things that happen to you, like getting blown up in war or
Mm-hmm.
being a survivor of sexual assault, that would be a trauma of commission,
Mm-hmm.
versus traumas of omission, which are the cumulative effect of smaller, isolating, traumatic events that happen over the course of a person's life, or experiences of neglect,
Yeah.
consistent feelings and experiences of not being heard or understood or seen.
Yeah. Yeah. Relational traumas. And you're bringing up such a great point and kind of tying it into childhood experiences. And I think what you're saying is that what we know is that children require love and attention and support and assistance. And if they don't get that, it is actually a type of trauma, and that one that hasn't really been recognized
It
until recently.
absolutely
It's a
is.
relational trauma. And so that
And our
taking that
brains
into consideration.
respond to all kinds of trauma with,
Yeah.
no matter what kind of human you are, what kind of trauma you experience. The way that our brains respond is through addictive and compulsive behaviors to fill in the gaps and to keep us safe, to get our needs met, when we're not able to get them met through other humans. So not only is trauma fundamental to being a human through this lens, but I'd also argue that addiction is fundamental to being a human, or to bonding to something.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, the way that we've, I guess let me offer one other piece of background to kind of explain a frame for what Seek Healing's program looks like and why it's applicable to everybody, whether you have a capital A addiction or something, or you're at a different place in your journey,
Yeah.
where it's more of this low grade suffering. It's all a shade of the same response to trauma. And what we're seeing now is that we all are living in a world, where we're increasingly disconnected from each other, where these relational traumas are more frequent in the way that we grow up, in the way that our society has shifted to living in nuclear families, or in families where there isn't sufficient support from caregivers in early childhood. to a world where social media is totally changing the landscape of how we
Yeah.
interact with each other,
Mm-hmm.
where a environment of competitive behavior in our education system encourages people to relate in ways that aren't authentic.
Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing is that on a widespread scale, this is having massive effects on our neurochemistry. Where at a really high level, our neurochemistry for social bonding is specifically implicated with opioid compounds.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have a really meaningful relationship with another human being, our brain is actually firing endogenously produced opioids.
Yeah.
Most of us know about endorphins, stands for endogenous morphine. And those compounds are being released to remind or emphasize to our system that this is, reinforce
Mm-hmm.
this experience of bonding with another
Yeah.
person. Um, and when we don't have those experiences, our brains quite literally feel starved
Yeah.
from the experience of social connection with another
I
person.
I love that we humans are built to bond, and in the absence of a human to bond with, we will bond to something else. You just said something that I hadn't heard said in quite the same way before, but that addiction is part of the human experience. I think because of that our need to bond is it's such a survival drive, and particularly when we are traumatized or afraid, there is even higher um, need to
Mm.
seek that connection. And in the absence of a healthy human connection, we will bond to something else. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's why we will find ourselves also getting into unhealthy
Yeah.
relationships. Um, and yeah, that's so huge. And it's why the program that we put together specifically invites people from all walks of life to participate. And hopefully this can be a part of the answer to your question of
Hmm.
how can I implement this quote solution of more social connection to helping me heal from addiction, because it is something that anyone can practice anywhere. But it starts with, so at the heart of meaningful social connection, and I think we need to point that out too, is that it's not just any kind of social connection that helps our brains heal from these traumas that we've been talking about. It's meaningful social connection. We can,
Hmm.
as humans, we can have this experience of being in a room full of people and still feel incredibly isolated and
Yeah.
lonely. And the
Yeah.
reason happens is because of conversations that feel transactional, that feel like there's an agenda behind it, like one person is just trying to get something from the other. Maybe you met on a dating app and there's like all this performance around like, I need to get this person to like me, or probably the most common interaction that we have in modern society is either buying or selling something from each other. And the truth is that just does not fire the same
Yeah.
type of neurochemical
Hmm.
cocktail that we need to reinforce to get that
Yeah.
need for connection met. What does fire it is when we have an experience of being completely equal, human to human,
Hmm.
without othering the other person, without a power dynamic being in play of, oh, this person's a doctor and I'm a sick patient, or
Hmm.
this person is my boss and I'm the employee. Real, authentic connection and the type that facilitates healing happens when we're able to just really see and meet each other where we're at,
Hmm.
um, and give each other the experience of being seen and heard.
Yeah.
So the program we've built is really designed around that principle. How can we take, I use the word othering like a verb, like how can we eliminate any sense of othering at all levels of the program, and invite people from all walks of life to participate. So while our mission is focused around serving people who are at risk for overdose or struggling with an IV drug bonding, that would apply to just about a third of our community, the way that it's
Hmm.
grown organically in the past year. Another third are people like myself who identify as being in some kind of long-term recovery from a substance use issue. And the last third of people are folks who've never identified with having a substance use issue before, but who are human and who therefore are
Yeah.
managing some shade of this spectrum experience of addiction and trauma. And by inviting all of these humans, no matter what their experience of life is, to come into the same room in the different program offerings that we have and really see and hear each other, the most incredible healing gets catalyzed.
Oh, I bet. And I'm just thinking how helpful it must be for all the participants to be in almost that kind of mixed group, with people who are coming from different life experiences, just to build those bridges of like understanding. Because it's so easy, I think, to have judgment, especially for people who do have a more severe addiction or substance use disorder. It can be easy to like forget that they're just like us,
Mhm.
really,
And
and
push them away and judge them, or to do that other like subtle way of judging that we can do, which is like, oh, I'm so sorry for you, or I feel bad for you.
yeah, totally. That piece. And also I would imagine to have for other people to have relationships with people who are in that more kind of, I don't want to use the word normal because that's, I don't think the right way to describe it, but to build those bridges to people who are in many ways like high functioning and happy and healthy humans can really be a positive experience all the way around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's just been mind blowing to witness as it's grown, the
Hmm.
people who you might think of in that happy, healthy, stable category, coming to a meeting and
Yeah.
having a really big trauma release and healing process that
I
comes up,
bet.
that someone who's, still kind of navigating their bond
Mhm.
with um, more hardcore drugs is holding space for them, and like really being there with them and
Isn't
listening to
that
them.
amazing?
It's really powerful. And I would
Yeah.
argue that like some of the most what's been so compelling for me about working in recovery is the access to like the willingness to start looking inward and
Hmm.
doing healing work is almost harder for those of us who like would consider ourselves having a more stable or normal
Hmm.
life. It's like there's no major problem,
Yeah.
so it's hard to get the momentum for looking inward, for doing healing work, for doing growth work. Whereas if your life gets totally shipwrecked, it's in
Yeah.
some ways easier to
I could
make a
see
new
that.
change.
Yeah, completely. Because there's this narrative around, I'm fine, it's not that big of a deal, and sort of like minimizing the pain or the trauma that you have experienced. And so to be with people who are really able to hold that space and like help you be able to talk about the life experiences that are very real for you, I could see that being so healing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it
And
really.
so yeah. And so you're saying that that is a really important piece of this work for anyone. And like right now I'm thinking, I don't know if you've been hearing about this like in the media, so like dry January is a thing, right?
Mhm.
And hearing about and certainly I think has been my experience working as a therapist, it's like even if people don't have this like big super serious substance abuse thing, they could be daily drinkers. And even like that whole 30-day experience, I've had clients come back and say to me, I have realized that alcohol or pot or whatever it is really like serving a major function in my life. It is playing a role in my life. I am having a relationship with a substance that I wasn't really aware of before I took it away for a little while.
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you see those kinds of things in your program and like what people do with that instead that is like, I don't know, more of a like healing, helpful path for them.
That's a great question, Lisa. And actually, the way that we address it or look at
Hmm.
it is pretty fundamental to the mission, or at least the founding principles of the
Hmm.
program itself, which is that the program isn't abstinence oriented. So
Hmm.
for 100 years, as a country, as a society, we've looked at recovery from addiction,
Yeah.
whether it's capital A addiction or addiction to anything, in the sense that you have to abstain completely from it if it's become a problem in your life.
Hmm.
And that's really, the truth is, that's really only one way to healing. And every human is going to have a different journey and a different way of getting their needs met and working through a bond that's harming them. So rather than defining recovery or healing as an outcome, as a
Hmm.
And I think it's in these cases where that becomes more interesting, right? Like, does this person have a drinking problem, or they're just like, I shouldn't be drinking 2 or 3 glasses of wine a night. I don't know. Maybe I should just be drinking one. All of those questions are valid and worth exploring. So the central question that we pose to anybody who joins the program is, what about this behavior is serving you, and what about this behavior is not serving you?
Yeah.
And starting to really acknowledge the ways in which you're getting your needs met with the bond that you might not like or feel ashamed of, as well as, things that aren't serving you about that bond. And that can be true for someone who's using heroin and who can easily say, this really isn't serving me because I can't hold down a job, because I feel disconnected from my kids, because, I'm having legal troubles. And it's serving me because I have really intense emotional pain and childhood trauma that this helps me manage.
Yeah.
And in the same way, we can look at somebody who's struggling in codependent relationships, maybe the partner of that person who's addicted to IV drugs, and say, what about this relationship is serving you? How is it getting your needs met? And what about it is really detracting from your ability to be a sovereign, healthy, happy person?
Yeah.
Those are questions that we all need to be asking ourselves, and not necessarily saying like, I have to give this up forever, but how can I change the dose that I'm taking, so to speak, or how do I shift the pattern so that it's more in balance?
Completely. God, what just a non-judgmental space that's really, it sounds like, genuinely focused on helping people gain that self-awareness around, who am I? What am I doing? How do I feel? What purpose is this serving, as opposed to labeling things good or bad or right or wrong, and really empowering them to make decisions that are good for them, and not this black and white, like, I'm going to predefine for you what your life should look like, what health should look like.
Which is inherently disempowering. It's saying you don't have a choice in this. You're just either right or wrong.
Yeah.
When the truth is we have, we have agency.
Yeah.
We put in our bodies what we don't.
Completely. But gosh, I could really see how that approach is so incredibly powerful, because to give people like a safe space to be able to talk about how they're feeling and what their actual experiences are, to be able to say something like, I don't feel good when I drink 3 glasses of wine every night. I can't sleep. My memory is crap. I feel more depressed compared to how I feel when I don't do that. And I feel more energized and more clear. I could see that being so much more like genuinely meaningful, and also like motivating, than somebody else telling you what that this is bad for your liver. You know what I mean? So like, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why the groups that we run are so simple. There's somebody who practices facilitation. They're called connection practice meetings. It's like an alternative to a 12-step meeting. Works really great as a complement, by the way, too. I want to throw that out there, because 12 steps work really well for a lot of people. But it's really nice to complement. If you're doing step work, it's really great to complement it with a space where you can come and do exactly what you just said, which is say out loud to other humans this truth that you're experiencing without worrying about judgment. And the only 2 rules that we use in the groups are, everything is confidential and no one is allowed to give anybody else advice.
Yeah.
We just practice reflecting. There's 3 main skills we talk about, which we are training through our another piece of the program that's called listening training. And they're really simple. When we listen to each other, we can reflect what we heard the other person say. We can ask a curious question. Or we can share with them the impact of what listening is like for us. And those are really rich ways to connect with others that we don't practice very often in our world, in our normal everyday conversations. But they give a person the space to just say what's true for them and really feel heard.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's wonderful. And another thing that really, I was like, wow, when I was reading about your work, is that you're not just kind of like dumping people into groups and being like, okay, connect everybody. It's like you're really like teaching people how to be with each other in such a way as to create like a really healing, helpful relational experience that I'm sure they can use with the people in their group. But I would imagine that it also spills over into other relationships in their life too. And you're actually teaching those skills.
Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
the goal, and we talk, it's great. I love that you brought that up because it's something we talk about often in the community is how hard it is to bridge the skills that we practice within Seek Healing into our families, into our partner relationships. It's much harder to not give advice in those relationships where we're deeply emotionally invested. But with practice, we can start to bridge those skills. And yeah, that is exactly what the program is designed to do, to provide that training, to provide the explicit training, which we do through listening training. But more than that, through the modeling. I think, it's one thing to go through listening training, get exposed to these skills, and another thing to be a part of a community where this is the ethos, where every time you talk to somebody, you can expect to like really be listened to, or for the person to say, another thing we talk about all the time is like not staying in a conversation you don't want to stay in. So if you can't listen to a person, say, hey, I'm having a hard day, my bandwidth is low, I don't have energy, like I don't have space to be with you right now, and communicating, starting to get a lived, felt sense of what it's like to communicate in a way that's radically authentic about our experience in any given moment.
Yeah, that authenticity. Wow. That's wonderful. And so I guess I'm curious to know too, like as you have walked with your participants, your community through this experience, so coming from a place where maybe they are bonded to a substance or unhealthy behaviors or an unhealthy relationship, and then start having these new experiences where they can really start to get in touch with themselves and their truth, and be in a community of people who they feel safe and understood with. What are some of the things that you have seen shift for them?
Well, we're seeing, there's a couple different ways I can answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
We've done some initial research from the pilot program that we ran last year, which just shows that compared to most rehab or post-rehab treatment models, which are largely 12-step based in the US, or abstinence-based, really, I should clarify, that we're seeing an 87% quote success rate for the folks who are going through the Seek Healing program.
Wow.
Versus in most of the standard model data, the kind of industry accepted rate is that 90% of people will experience relapse.
Wow.
Especially for opiate use disorder within a year after completing a treatment program, 59% within the first week and 80% within the first month. So we're measuring it a little bit differently in that, because the word relapse in itself is kind of a problem in the model we've been talking about. It implies that there is a goal, and the goal is abstinence. And if you fall short of that goal, then you've messed up, and then there's shame in all of that. So we actually don't use the word relapse at all. We talk about if you return to a pattern you were trying to change, and that was something that wasn't a part of your intentions. So the way we're measuring that 87% success rate is around how many people are still adhering to the intentions that they set for their healing journey when they first got started with Seek Healing. So that includes whether you were trying to abstain 100% from all drugs and alcohol, which is about 60% of the sample, as well as folks who are trying to abstain from just their drug of choice only. So for this study sample, that's heroin and meth. So people who are trying to abstain from that, but maybe still using alcohol or cannabis or something like that, as well as people who are on medication-assisted treatment, using things like methadone or Suboxone to support their recovery. So we see that 87% are still adhering to their intentions after sticking with the Seek Healing program for 6 months to a year, compared to 13% for traditional rehab programs.
So just out of curiosity, I'm wondering what you see as being this is the wrong word. I almost said most helpful components, but like the things that are different about your program that are helping people create these real and lasting changes, but almost in a much more gentle way than some of our, standard issue treatment recovery. I mean, like, if you had to boil it down to the things that you see happening in your groups and with your community, what is most impactful?
Mm, yeah, I'm getting
And that's
past.
a tough question. And I don't know if that's you're like, well, there are three things, but
Yeah, I definitely don't have any kind of standard answer for you there,
uh,
but I love that this feels like a more natural conversation anyway. And what I hear you asking is like, yeah, behind those numbers, like what is the real
yeah,
impact
why?
that we see and what really works? And hmm, I mean, what comes up for me hearing that is just the faces of people in the moment
Mm-hmm.
after a meeting or after they get done with listening training, which is a huge part of the program. Um, and like talking about processing some experience they had of
Yeah.
connecting with another person. It comes up for me that the folks who have returned to a pattern they were trying to change while they were with us, who stayed in communication with us
Mm-hmm.
100% through that whole experience, where, when someone went back to a pattern they were trying to change, and rather than being ostracized from our community
Yeah, like
or
rejected. Mm-hmm.
rejected and shamed and, oh, you got to start back at square one. Instead, there were seekers like at their house that afternoon with a meal and
Oh,
medicine and staying with them to make sure they weren't lonely, and even if
wow.
they're, in a place that feels really shameful or really disheveled and like they haven't slept for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Moments where people, but I think the empowerment actually is the piece that I want to get back to, because
Mm-hmm.
what's coming alive for me right now is like I can see like a couple different seekers' faces and like their eyes as they're telling me how impactful this has been. And I think it comes from this empowerment piece, from this piece of feeling like I get to be in control of my healing journey. This is something that I can do and that I want to do, and not something that I'm being forced to do either by my life circumstances or by a doctor,
Yeah.
or, because my partner told me that I had to, or anything like that. It's more, and through the magic of connection, that it's
Mm-hmm.
not coming from me being like, yeah, I'm a terrible person, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic. It's from like maybe really offering somebody else a powerful reflection in a
Yeah.
meeting, or saying something that I've never shared before in a group setting, or out loud, period, in my life, that
Mm-hmm.
feels really shameful and vulnerable, and putting it out there for everyone to hear. And now it's not just in my head, it's like it's out there in the world, and it's
Mm-hmm.
okay. It's
Yeah.
okay that I did this terrible thing to my friend when I was 14 years old, or
Mm-hmm.
that I think this about myself, or that I hate
Mm-hmm.
myself this much, or all of these terrible negative self-talk. But what about, another big one is talking about suicide for the first time in front of a group,
Mm.
suicidal ideation.
Yeah.
Whereas in most places in the medical industry, if anyone says the word suicide, we're real quick to hit the big red button and get the person committed or something, when so much of the time people just really need a space to talk about that,
Mm-hmm.
and to say that to name this is the experience of depression that I'm having, and this is what I've been thinking about, and have that just be okay, and hold that as a group.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a good answer to your question, but it's those moments of
Yeah.
like getting
Yeah.
really vulnerable and having it be okay.
Totally. That's just as you were talking, I was thinking about how like the contrast, and again, like I am no expert on substance abuse recovery, but it seems to me that a lot of it is like what you were saying, sort of shame based, like this is bad and wrong. And that a lot of times people who do have substance abuse problems have terrible shame and guilt and feel so bad about themselves. But that also like almost makes it like more of a need to use substances to like escape from those really terrible feelings,
Yeah.
because they are functional, that people feel a little bit better when they do the XYZ. And what you're really saying is that your program is really like building people back up in a very like fundamental and powerful way, like helping them um, gain new understanding of themselves and have the experience of being prized for who and what they are, exactly as they are, and having that intrinsic motivation to say, I would like something different for my life, and also like a community to see them and support them as they're working towards that, like almost recognition that they're not okay, like if they fall back into old patterns, as opposed to that they've done something bad and wrong,
Yeah.
like a recognition of something
Feels
hard came
terrible.
up for you and you
Hard.
did the best that you could in that moment, and we recognize that struggle, and here's a casserole. I love it.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, that's just
Mhm.
amazing.
Mhm.
Wow. So, and as I'm listening, I'm trying to distill this into things that, some of our listeners can hear. And so that the key really to making that real and lasting change in your own life is perhaps recognizing that you have bonded to something that is on one level kind of helping you. It is meeting a need of some kind, but to get kind of clarity around what purpose is that serving, and are you happy with that, or would it be healthier or more empowering for you to perhaps transfer that bond from whatever situation it is to a healthy supportive relationship, and maybe putting your energy into creating those connections and that kind of community for yourself through things like trying to connect more deeply with the people that you already know, and taking chances about being more vulnerable and being a better listener. Um,
Mhm.
does that kind of capture what you, or is there, not offering advice to people, what else would you say to someone who's like, how would I apply these ideas?
Yeah, I think it's really well
Mhm.
summarized, especially starting from that place of what about this is serving me, what is not serving me, acknowledging
Yeah.
that I have needs that aren't getting met. Um, and what I heard you say, as you're looking at the parts that aren't serving you, what to do with that. And the
Mhm.
first thing I would offer there is experiment. Try something different. Don't be attached to, I have to stop doing this thing completely in order to get the results that I want.
Yeah.
But through the lens of being able to understand how it does serve you, start to just play with changing the dose. If it's a person, changing how much time you spend with them, or changing your boundaries around how you interact with them.
Yeah.
Um, and just start to experiment a little bit. And then what will support you in that process of shifting how your needs are getting met are certainly augmenting, somehow getting more access to experiences of deeper connection,
Mhm.
which, if it's deeper connection socially, involves these skills that we've been talking about: non-judgmental listening, not giving advice. um, I often will use the idea that mindfulness and meditation are
Mhm.
practices that I think we're all becoming more and more familiar with, especially in recent years. There's so much research that's coming out. And I really encourage people to think about bringing mindfulness practices to conversation. That's really what we're talking about here. It's how present can you be when you're with somebody and talking to them. So it's about letting go of advice and letting go of an agenda, and it's also about not planning what you're going to say next.
Yeah.
When it's your turn to talk, what do I really want to say in this moment? What I'm not like needing to perform or prove anything or make sure that how I express myself is really well aligned with my Instagram profile. It's what do I actually want to say in this moment? And is it okay for what I want to say right now to be a little bit different from maybe what I would have said a week ago, but really being present with your truth in this moment and starting to treat conversation and connection
Yeah.
like a mindfulness practice.
I love that idea. And also just want to point out something else that you're saying, which is that the mindfulness is really around what kind of listener am I being right now? How can I be present with this other human being who is communicating with me, and sort of like shifting out of ourselves and into like, how can I have a connection with this person? Because I think a lot of times what I hear is that people are very um, focused or have a lot of even anxiety around what is the other person thinking about me right now? And that can just like shut people down, because then they get really self-conscious about what they're saying or how they're saying it, or is it okay for me to say this? And you're talking about doing something completely different, which is like, don't worry about what other people are thinking about you. How
Mhm.
can you be connected to them right now?
Exactly.
That
Yeah.
is good stuff.
Every time we show up with another person, there's me and you, and there's also we. Like we
Yeah.
create a whole new thing when we're in conversation and connection with another person that really has very little to do with like the judgments that we both share about each other. It's more
Yeah.
like, what are we creating through this
Mhm.
connection? And it comes from just really, really being completely present with that listening both to the other person, and to ourselves, and what it is we want to say and utter and speak.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, those are wonderful, wonderful takeaways, and I feel like we could talk for a long time about all this. But I also, and I know that you don't have all the time in the world, and thank you for being so generous with your time. Um, I also want to come back to the other like big question that I had for you. So like, I know because I get questions from listeners on this topic, and I've had so many clients who, I mean, have literally been in tears in my office because their brother is addicted to opiates and is killing himself slowly, and they can't do a thing about it. Or they see one of their parents like drinking themselves to death, or I mean, are really like afraid that their loved one is going to die. Like that's the fear. And they don't know how to help their person, and they want to, but like when they try to talk to them, it backfires, or it just feels like they push them away. And I know that this is a very complex topic, and there's not like, 3 steps to make this all better. But what are some things or ideas you would advise someone who's in this situation and cares about someone who is not well, and who maybe is not behaving well either as a result of their illness? I mean, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts about it.
Where should we start?
It's a great question, and it's so central to this conversation we've already been having. Honestly, I guess where I want to start is that um, my tendency to want to help that person, or fix that person, or make their situation better,
Fix.
or
It's a good
help them get
word.
better,
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of the same addictive qualities that they're navigating
Ah,
in their bonding patterns. So we're talking about the edges of codependence here, right? Like
yeah,
the
yeah.
real need, and depending on how enmeshed you become with this person in your life who you care about and love so much, um, there are often qualities of this broken relational dynamic in those relationships. A need to fix, a need to, whenever you're with this person, if you're like me, because I have, this is still a work in progress in my life, but I'm with this person, I care about them so much, and I get like this urgency that comes up. Really, it's very somatic for me. I really feel it in my chest area, like this,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like they're hurting so much, especially if you're someone who's strongly empathic. You might even be able to feel their pain in your body,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes really urgent for you to help them find a way out. And the truth is, the best advice that I can give you, is to not give them advice, and to
Yeah,
practice these same relational
totally.
techniques that we're talking about, with the Seek Healing program, of how can you just reflect to them what their experience is like. How can you practice this way of mindfulness and conversation with them? That is by far the best medicine you can offer every single time you're with them. It's actual medicine that you can give them, at a neurochemical level.
That's so amazing. But I mean, what you're saying though, it's like radical self-awareness, because what you're saying is your desire to fix or make them feel better is actually a desire to make yourself feel better, because you can't tolerate the fact that they're doing whatever that they're doing. So it's really like taking ownership about what's going on inside of you, and
Yeah.
coming back to that, how can I be present with this person in a non-judgmental way,
Yep.
even if they're
Yeah.
not behaving the way I think they should be behaving right now?
Right, exactly. And that kind
Wow.
of another like lens into that is to think about this in terms of compassionate boundary
Mm-hmm.
setting. So you're setting um, boundaries potentially with this person, especially if they're, you know, engaging in behaviors that are hurtful or crossing your boundaries. How do you set boundaries while still showing love and still showing that you're there and you're not going to go anywhere? Um, and getting your own needs met, like you were just pointing out,
Yeah.
without trying to project that onto them by fixing their experience. And a good little hack that I like to give people for this moment is this concept. I call it Rule Zero. And Rule Zero is that if it feels awkward to say, or you're worried it's going to make the other person feel bad or mad or guilty or anything negative, then you have to find a way to say it with compassion and with love. But the way that this shows up in this situation normally is, my real truth right now, my Rule Zero truth is I feel really awkward and I really want to like fix this and make this problem better for you. And the truth is nobody knows how to solve addiction. I can't go through your healing journey for you, but I'm really agitated right now because I have such a strong desire to make this go away.
Yeah.
And just see like what the response to that is,
Yeah. Yeah. You're to be brave in those moments and be courageous and be vulnerable yourself and say, this is how I am feeling. I'm feeling really anxious about this situation. I am really worried. Um, but taking that moment as a moment of connection as opposed to withholding it and just having it be another layer of things that go unsaid and that contribute to that distance in the
Yeah, because that's only
relationship.
going to make you feel right more disconnected. It'll like increase this experience of you being the normal person and the other person being the addict. When really
Yeah.
what we're trying to get to is this connected place.
Mm-hmm.
It's acknowledging, that you're doing healing work just as much as they are.
Yeah. Wow. um I'm trying to formulate a question. You brought up something before, and you had a term for it that I can't remember. It was great. Was it like compassionate boundary setting? Is that what you called it? So I'm thinking of a situation that I heard of recently. Somebody that I'm close to has a family member who is very active in an opiate addiction right now, and as a result is separated from his daughter, who's a little like 3 years old. And he's just not safe, so he can't be around her right now, and also has been engaging in like some criminal behaviors to pay for his habit, which is also a thing that happens. um, so I know that that's probably like an extreme scenario, but I know that like in my own life, like I try really hard to be compassionate with people. And what is hardest for me, and I see this happening for others too, is that when someone is behaving in such a way that they are causing harm or pain or possibly trauma to other people, that's when it gets really hard for me to remain compassionate with them. um, I don't know if the compassionate boundary thing that you described informs that kind of scenario at all. I mean, I know that's really hard, but what would some of your thoughts be about like what do you do with that?
It's so hard.
It's so hard.
And this gets really sticky and complicated really fast,
It
right?
does.
But I am gonna my reply is going to be just to hold on to this same beacon of light
Mm-hmm.
that we keep circling around in this whole conversation, which is vulnerability, and coming back to that idea of Rule Zero. It's not that extreme an example. It is extreme in a lot of ways, but it's also one that is very, I hear similar situations all the time.
Yeah.
I think they're becoming far more common for a lot of us and a lot of our families than we'd like to admit. And it's exactly what you said. It's what results from suffering and from people hurting each other.
Yeah.
um, and yeah, there's still, so the opportunity in this example or this situation for Rule Zero is to say, is to step back even further and say, this is my truth this far back, that when you said, I mean, it's hard because there's not a specific example of like a relational dynamic that's happening, but I'm imagining it's that having to tell the person
Mm-hmm.
that they can't see their child.
Yeah,
Uh,
and I think the relational dynamic that's actually happening in this specific situation is that the person has been cut off by the
mm,
family in a lot of ways
and
because of all this.
or is there any communication happening or?
There is some, but it's limited.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
But you're. Mm-hmm,
I mean, the piece that I guess that I'm trying to illuminate is that there's
mm-hmm,
a way of still being in relationship with this person, which is still showing compassion and love. It's not saying I'm going to cut you out of my life
yeah.
completely. There's a way of still being with them and holding certain boundaries firm, like, you can't
Mm-hmm,
communicate with this child right now, or you can't be present with this child. Um, I don't know what that looks like in this particular situation, even if it's just like
mm-hmm.
meeting this person for coffee somewhere or going for a walk and hearing them and using these tools we've been talking about in this podcast of reflecting,
Yeah,
asking questions, not judging, and continuing to show up. That's where the
yeah,
compassion part comes in. I
yeah.
think there's a way, what all compassionate boundary setting means is there's a way to set really clear boundaries, to hold them, and to still love the person through it. And there's actually so much healing that's possible through that. It's a important part of doing authentic
Mm-hmm.
connection work in any relationship.
Yeah. But that's such great advice because I think that what a lot of people do because they don't know what else to do is they do wind up cutting off people or that whole like, tough love model. And you're saying that the most important helpful thing that you can do is find a way to maintain that connection and also be setting very clear, firm boundaries like, no, I am not giving you money.
Yeah.
And let's go on a walk and I'm going to listen to you and connect with you in a non-judgmental and compassionate way and I could see how that could be like almost a lifeline in a lot of ways for someone who's really struggling to know that
Mhm.
they still matter. Yeah.
It really
So,
can be. It's not easy, like there's so
mhm.
much like coming into my awareness as I hear you reflect it back because I'm aware of how hard it is to have a non-judgmental conversation with someone who is asking you for money or who's hurting
Yeah.
a child that you're related to. And there are some ways in which it's almost impossible sometimes to start seeing this person in a non-othering sort of way. And if you can't do that, then your rule zero is, look, I don't know how to have a conversation with you
Yeah.
right now. I want to, but at least in
Mhm.
this moment, I'm really emotionally activated and I can't.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go for a walk another time. I would, like to hear you, listen to you. I guess,
Mhm.
just keeping in mind that what they need is someone, even if it's not
Yeah,
you, to connect with
totally.
in an authentic, non-judgmental way, to be heard and to talk about these things and the ways that they're, making named and revealed somehow in a way that's safe.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to even your program. Like I could understand how the person who is bonded to a substance could really have almost a safer and more effective healing experience with the kinds of groups that you guys are doing because I think a lot of times family members they are afraid or they're angry and it's like emotionally charged in the way that getting involved with a group like yours wouldn't be. So then on that note, so other things that people could do in addition to hopefully finding ways of staying connected to their family member but is also you know at least providing them with information about the kind of work that your organization does and perhaps and I hope this is okay to say, but maybe even in small ways, even like supporting your organization. Like, I know that for me, it's been helpful in my own life if I hear about like a natural disaster or some thing that's going on to be able to even like make a small donation, like even though I cannot solve that problem, I can be a very small part of the solution in the sense that I am supporting the people who are solving that problem. Is that something that you guys are open to, or I'm wondering how.
Absolutely. I appreciate you bringing it up
Mhm.
so much. And you're right, it's about supporting the idea and the development of it, especially in this case, a really groundbreaking and kind of revolutionary way of
Yeah.
mental health care and substance use healthcare. Um, that doesn't, because it doesn't have, because it's so new and there aren't structures in place for it in our society, that means that there's also no institutional ways for funding it. So donations are really, really appreciated, and we're so grateful if you're inspired to become a part of this movement in that way, because we are building something that is scalable and something that we can take to different. Right now, it's currently only available in Asheville, North Carolina. Um, but if you're listening to this and you're inspired, check out our website at seekhealing.org. There's
Hmm.
a donate button just right there on the main page, and you can set up a one-time donation or a recurring monthly donation, even for the cost of your average monthly Netflix subscription.
Yeah.
I think like
And it's a nonprofit organization,
yes,
right?
yes.
So, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, we're
So,
a 501c3, and all of the um, donations that come in go 100% to program participants and to growing this program so that we can raise its level of impact to
yeah.
support the opioid overdose epidemic that this country is facing.
Now, do people ever like fly into Asheville, North Carolina to do this with you guys? Because the way you described it, like this sounds like a long game that this isn't like a 28 days and like, okay, good luck with that kind of deal. So is it pretty much like at this point for people who live in Asheville, or do you have people who come in from other places to participate
People are
in
actually
this? Or,
coming in to
okay.
experience it on a temporary basis the more the word is getting out about what
Hmm.
we're doing. Um, it is designed to hold a person in community for as
Yeah.
long as they want. But the cool thing about it too is because it's so open door, you can just kind of drop into whatever serves you and stop coming when it doesn't serve you. And so what a lot of people do is come for listening training, that course that I keep mentioning. We offer that for free in Asheville once a month or so. And people are welcome to come and experience that as a 2-day course, usually on a weekend, once a month. The next dates for that are also on our website, seekhealing.org. And the other thing that we're encouraging people to do, the more that people are reaching out from across the country, like, wow, this is awesome, like how can I do this in my community, is we're also able to bring listening training to your community if you can find a organization to sponsor us coming. And cost about
Very cool.
$2,500 or $3,000, and then we can come out with 2 facilitators, do it at a local treatment center. If you know somebody who works in rehab treatment,
Hmm.
we've worked with public health departments before, or just private sponsors who want to do this, like at the local Y, or
Hmm.
you want to do it in some other community, a church community that you're a part of. We are passionate about getting this information out there and empowering people to start relating with each other in a different way.
Well, I'm so glad you are. It sounds like you guys are doing amazing, really impactful work. And I'm so just excited for you. And I'll be very interested to see where all this goes. And I really appreciate you coming and speaking with me today to share these ideas and give people just like not just direction, but hope.
Mm.
It's good stuff.
I really appreciate that reflection. I'm glad that it served in that way. And I'm also really grateful for the conversation, Lisa. This has been very energizing, and it's
Oh,
just been
good.
really great bouncing back and forth with you.
I really enjoyed talking with you too.